Well, hello and welcome to Holding the Line, America's Fight for Religious Freedom. I'm Troy Schmidt, and I have with me today Jeremy Dice. Jeremy Dice is with First Liberty, and he is special counsel for litigation and communications, and also the host for something much like this of First Liberty Briefing. Jeremy, how long have you been with First Liberty?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been here now for, I think, 7 years, or maybe just a little over 7 years, defending religious liberty for all Americans around the country. And it's brought me to such places as Apopka, Florida, and way out to the other side of the country in Bremerton, Washington, up in Augusta, Maine, all over the country, defending religious liberty for all Americans.
Yeah, you're a busy man. I know you were the first person to reach out to me when I had my issue with the local school board and stopping chaplains. And you actually made a visit in person, and that impressed me a lot. I think you also had something going on with someone in Apopka, so I think that's why you were here. But, ever since then, I've been following you, following First Liberty, came out to interview you also for a documentary that we're working on, and you were very gracious to give us your time. So many things are happening these days with religious freedom and the attack on it. And your organization, First Liberty, is valiantly fighting for our religious freedom on all levels. First, tell us why is fighting for religious liberty so important?
Yeah, to set that kind of on its stage, let me tell you about our mission at First Liberty Institute and then sort of how we go about that. Our mission is to defend and preserve religious liberty for all Americans across the country in accordance with the vision that our founding fathers laid out for us. And so that takes us to defending our religious liberty in the courtrooms and as a legal organization. We do that in four separate areas, that one of which is the schools. We want to make sure our religious liberty is full and robust within our public schools. We want to make sure our students can speak about their faith during that time as well as teachers when they have the opportunity. We want to defend religious liberty in our military, because our armed forces are under a lot of attack. And though they give up a lot of things when they go into the military, their civil rights and religious liberty is not one of them. So we're protecting that there as well. We defend religious liberty within our houses of worship. That should be self-evident, obviously, where those stand. And the amount of attacks on those you would think would be ebbing, but actually they continue to flow towards the shores of the churches more often than I like to see. And then we make sure that we're able to defend religious liberty within the public square, where a lot of people find themselves. And so as an American, you're in one of those four categories at some point of your life, or at multiple points in your life. You're in multiple points of those categories. So your religious liberty is there all the time. We want to make sure that you have the right to be able to speak about your faith, first, because that's what the founding fathers promised you to do in the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, to have that free exercise of religion. But we also want to make sure that there is a welcoming of religious liberty in the public square. Just a couple of years ago, we took a case to the Supreme Court of the United States on behalf of the American Legion, defending a 95-year-old veterans memorial that was in the shape of a cross. And that decision, the Bladensburg decision, that's right. That decision now stands for the proposition that it should be presumed that religious displays and symbols on public property, that those are presumptively constitutional now. So that changed the law. Now the other side has to prove that they're unconstitutional, rather than us having to prove that they are constitutional. It's presumed to be constitutional now, a major shift in our legal landscape of things. But the attacks are becoming fast and furious and kind of hard to sort of gather within the funnel of what to focus on next. Whether that's for coaches or for everyday Americans, they're all coming very fast.
Yeah, we're going to get into some of the specific ones I know that you're dealing with directly at First Liberty, but it is fascinating. It looks to me, and I know that there's always been attacks, but I would say the last 10 years or so, it's really ramped up. My case in 2014, when it started, I looked and I went, am I the only one this is happening to? And I went, no, it's happening to other people. But since then, I've been being more aware of it. It seems to be a lot greater than we think.
Yeah, and they're kind of a different mode of attack these days, it seems. It's not just your typical school case where you've had student club that wants to form to talk about religious things, and though they have the Frisbee Club and the AV Club and the Do Good Acts Club, they don't allow a Christian school on campus. Well, that's settled law from the time I was 6 years old. So that shouldn't be an issue. Congress settled that back in 1984. And so that shouldn't be a question mark at all. We do face those on occasion, but those aren't the attacks. Now the question mark is whether you're going to be allowed outside the four walls of your church to embrace your faith, or whether the four walls of your church are going to be allowed to talk about the faith in the way that your tradition requires. We've even had synagogues in the state of California that are attacked by animal rights groups because they're observing a millennia-old tradition of a practice called koporos, which involves the use of a chicken that is then slaughtered by a shochet, a Jewish butcher, that traces all the way back to the scapegoat in Old Testament times. And yet this is a continued attack year after year that you wouldn't think we'd have to litigate all the time. I never thought that as an attorney defending religious liberty, it would take me to California defending chickens or the right to actually observe them in the matter of a synagogue there. But here we are, and we're litigating these things because we're having rabbis literally taken to jail by animal rights groups because he pressed charges against people who trespassed on his property and vandalized his home. And yet they turn around and sue him for going against their efforts there. So these are kind of bizarre times that we're living in, I recognize, but they're important times. We're required to pass on this thing called freedom to our kids because they're not going to get it in the bloodstream. We have to teach it to them every single generation.
There's a number of cases you've been fighting, and I'm really curious about them. But I think, the first thing that's really sort of hit us is what is happening with COVID. It seems that there's been a fresh attack now. So what are some of the cases you're getting within the last year with the shutdown and especially with churches shutting down?
Yeah, it was almost a year ago that we filed suit on Good Friday on behalf of On Fire Christian Center in Louisville, Kentucky. And to take you back, remember, this is in the very early stages of the shutdown, and everything was shut down. And we thought maybe the virus was hanging around in loose particles in the air, and you could inhale it at any moment or something like that. And people were genuinely, and I think rightly, scared. We came out initially and said, look, it's okay for us to kind of press pause and make sure everything's safe, but this has got to be a temporary thing, and governments cannot overreach, knowing full well that they would certainly overreach within time. And that occurred on Easter weekend when On Fire Christian Center wanted to host a drive-in church service. So remember these are when you drive to your parking lot, park there, keep the doors shut and the windows rolled up, and you listen to your pastor up on a stage preach over a AM transmitter in your car radio.
Wow.
And so this is what the plan was. But the mayor of Louisville said that if anybody went to that with their doors closed and their windows up, having gotten in their car in their garage and stayed there from point A to point B, he was going to send the police there, and they were going to write down your license plate number. And when you went home, you were going to get a visit from the law enforcement officer to tell you that you now are in a 14-day quarantine period, or what we used to call home confinement. And all of this for the audacity to exercise your faith in an otherwise free country.
Now, it seems that some of this, early on, we didn't know what was going on. Some of it would seem to be fear-based, maybe, or we just don't quite understand all of it. Or in that case, do you think there was something else sort of going on in all of it?
It's hard to read, and here's why it's been difficult, is because the inordinate pressure that's been put upon religious exercise as opposed to every other course of action in your life in Louisville. And this is what the judge decided. So we filed a lawsuit on Good Friday, and so that our client could have services on Easter Sunday morning. By Saturday of that weekend, the judge ruled on our case. And he said, look, you got people parking in liquor stores, in the parking lots of Home Depot. You're allowed to go over there, but why would you say that you can park at Walmart and Home Depot and ABC Liquor, but you can't park at a church? This makes no sense whatsoever.
So they were determining what was essential and what was not essential, right?
Right, and they were saying that the free exercise of religion, a constitutionally guaranteed right, I might add, was less essential than walking through the aisles of Home Depot or stopping in the plumbing section to talk to your friend 6 feet away. And so that lack of equality, that would become the theme that we would have all this litigation going after. That same time, we were dealing with that case in Louisville on Maundy Thursday, so the Thursday before Good Friday, before Easter, in Greenville, Mississippi. An African-American congregation there was going to have the same thing, outdoor service, drive-in church service. The pastor in that situation didn't have amplification. He was just going to talk loud. And trust me, they could hear him through the windscreens of their cars with no problem at all. And so his congregation parked there. And at the same time, remember, this is in southern Mississippi, Greenville, Mississippi, African-American congregation. The entire police force that was on duty in Greenville, Mississippi shows up, surrounds this African-American congregation. And one of the white officers walks up to the pastor of that church and says, "I've got a message from the governor. Your rights have been suspended." Suspended rights. I'm sorry, I don't recall that being permissible. And I recall other things in our history that would smack of incredulity if we understood that history well in that area, for someone being able to brazenly say such a thing. The pastor, by the way, went on to hold forth the gospel and held his entire service there as 6, 7, 8 police cars, cruisers are surrounding their church with lights blazing the entire time without any fear. We filed a lawsuit the next week, and that situation resolved itself, well, rather quickly once that lawsuit got in place there. But the mere fact that we actually had to go to court to say, hey, wait a minute, we understand we're in exigent times. These are crazy emergency situations that we face ourselves in, but let's not lose our heads. The Constitution has not taken the year off. It still holds sway. The First Amendment is still in force. You can't surround African-American churches in the South and tell them that their rights have been suspended, especially when one of those rights is enshrined in the First Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Do you think with COVID and the sort of fear and the precedents that we're sort of establishing, that there are some things we need to be looking forward to, maybe cautiously, what could happen?
Yeah, look, here's what we've learned in this entire process, I think, of COVID-19. Those are just 2 cases. I have a list as long as my arm of churches that have called us in 2020. And it ranged from as bad as being surrounded by the police to as innocuous as a county commission in southern Texas telling Christian schools they could not resume in-person meetings again. And when we corrected all those situations, either with a letter or a lawsuit. But the lesson I think we have to learn here throughout this entire COVID-19 process is that power will grow to the void that is left. And so if we depend upon our leadership, our political leadership, to be the ones to say, you've got to govern us from A to B, from birth to grave, I think we're setting ourselves up for what the founders warned us against, is that power installed in one individual is going to be corruptive and despotic. Power dispersed, though, will be much more free. And that was the beauty of the Founding Fathers' vision for these things. And you see this around the country. You got Gavin Newsom, who has been almost dictatorial to the people of California. They can sing on The Masked Singer on TV, but you can't wear a mask and sing in your church. This doesn't make any sense. How about Bill de Blasio in New York City? You talk about investing too much power in one individual. He told synagogues in New York City that if they dared gather in the streets to celebrate the death or to remember the death, I should say, of a beloved rabbi, that he would permanently shut down their synagogues. And then he left City Hall to go down and march arm in arm in protest through the streets for Black Lives Matter. The hypocrisy here obviously knows no bounds.
Yeah, there's a certain emboldening that's happened with the government that we have to be, I think, very careful of. That if they begin to create some restrictions under circumstances, that could come back to haunt a lot of churches and other organizations too. So we got to be very careful, I think, and that's what we've learned through this. Certainly people like MacArthur out in California fought, held the line, and we saw some good things come out of that.
And we're also seeing that in legislation now as well. The Texas legislature, I think Utah and Arkansas, South Dakota, I believe, and some others, Arizona, they're all considering legislation coming out of this saying, hey, let me remind you, if our amendments to our state constitutions weren't clear enough, churches and religious bodies are essential, and you can't shut them down anymore. Early on in the process, here in McKinney, Texas, just a few miles from where I'm sitting, the city mayor there said that no more than 10 people can gather inside of a building regardless of size. Well, not even the 12 disciples could get together to do their ministry if that were the case. And so even in a state that is as free as Texas, we have to remind people, I'm sorry, but the church does not answer to you on matters of religion. You cannot shut them down. This whole free exercise of religion thing, yeah, the founders meant what they said when they put that in the Constitution. You've got to respect that.
Yes. Well, thematically, the whole idea of putting masks on and silencing speech all seem to have gone together through all of this. And so, we're going to learn some lessons through this. Hopefully people are going to continue to fight if they ever see anything like this happen again. And you guys are doing a great job of helping us get free of some of these enemies that are out attacking the religious freedom. Now, one case has just recently hit the news again, and I know that you're very tightly involved in it, and that's Joe Kennedy. Now, Joe Kennedy, give us some background on what his case was about. And then it went to it was at least offered to the Supreme Court, and then explain what happened since then.
Yeah, so Coach Kennedy is a 20-year Marine Corps veteran. So he served his country honorably, fought for freedom in the Marine Corps, left the Marine Corps, and then retired to Bremerton, Washington to begin civilian life. And as he came out of the Corps, they asked him to consider volunteering to coach a football team at Bremerton High School there outside of Seattle. And so he did, but he said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to thank God regularly for the opportunity to not only coach the game, but for the kids and for their effort and their safety and things like that. So he made this commitment to himself and to God that he would go to the 50-yard line after each game, take a brief knee and 15 to 30 seconds of silent prayer, thanking God for the kids, the game, and the safety.
Did he force anyone else to go out and pray with him?
No, of course not. He went out by himself. And it was kind of crazy how that happened. When kids see people doing that, they're kind of curious. They went up to coach and said, "Hey, coach, what you doing? You're looking for your contact lens or tying your shoe? What's going on?" And he said, "Well, I'm just saying a quick prayer." And they said, "Well, can we join you?" And the coach said, "Well, look, it's a free country." Because he stood in that moment, he understood a couple things. Number one, he knew he couldn't tell them that they should do that. That would be inappropriate as an adult telling them that they have to engage in some sort of religious activity. But nor could he stop them from engaging in religious activity. And that's a very key point that I think has been lost in a lot of this discussion. For him to have said, "No, you can't do that," would be to communicate that religion is bad. You shouldn't be doing that in public. And that is itself equally wrong. And frankly, it's hostile to religion to even consider that.
Or it's just something that we adults do,
right,
not something kids can do.
Right. So he just said it's a free country. And lo and behold, they decided to take up their own freedoms. And they would gather around him, and it kind of morphed into some other things. And he was told later on that you can't be doing X or Y. And he said, "Oh, that's fine. I understand. I didn't get that at the time, but I'll be glad to stop that." But he wouldn't give up on his commitment that he had made when he started coaching, which was to take that 15 to 30 second knee and silent prayer. And so it came to a head one time about 5 years ago where they said, if you engage in prayer, it's going to be seen as a public demonstration of religion. We all know what you're doing when you're down there. And so if you do that again, you're going to be terminated. He said, "Well, you're going to have to fire me because that's what I'm going to do." And so he took another knee in silent prayer, and lo and behold, his contract was not renewed. He was fired from being.
Who's the they that was against them?
It was the school district there in Bremerton. So the school district fires him from his coaching job. We sued the school district. The judge there upholds the decision of the school district to terminate it. We go to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And they say that because he engaged in demonstrative acts of religion or public displays like this, and because the kids could see him and they knew what he was doing, he was engaged in illegal behavior on behalf of the school district. And so they were right to terminate him because they could have gotten in trouble for whatever reason there as well, supposedly. We asked the Supreme Court to review this, and they said, "You know what, this isn't quite ripe yet. You need to go back down and answer a few questions to make sure we know what we're reviewing here." So we did. We got those questions answered through a process of discovery, some more motions and some decisions by the district court. And then last week, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals came out and again said, yeah, he was right to be fired. And furthermore, because he actually answered the questions of the press, this took on a nature of not being private. This was clearly a public demonstration, as they called it. And so his termination was right for that reason as well. So here we go. Now, because Coach Kennedy exercised one First Amendment activity, the free exercise of religion, standing on a knee or sitting on a knee in 15 to 30 seconds of silent prayer, he was fired. Because he then engaged his free speech, another First Amendment activity, in talking to the press, which is also protected by the press clause of the First Amendment. The Ninth Circuit says that this was itself terrible. And so now we have the trifecta of First Amendment violations. Exercise, speech, and press are all in one by the Ninth Circuit here. And so at this moment, we're sitting here figuring out, okay, are we going to appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States directly, or do we go back and ask the entire Ninth Circuit to review this before we do? But at the end of the day, here's what's going to happen. We're going to eventually be back before the Supreme Court of the United States. Why? Because if this decision is allowed to stand, then it could be you, it could be another high school coach in your backyard, it could be your kid's high school coach, it could be your kid's teacher. If he or she wears a crucifix around their neck, or perhaps wears a yarmulke or a hijab, these are outward displays of religion that could get them in trouble. Perhaps they say grace in the lunchroom over their food, and the students can see them while they're doing so. Or perhaps they're just wearing branded T-shirts for the school's insignia with their school's insignia on their chest at Cracker Barrel, and they bow before their food there. They could find themselves potentially being terminated. No one should be terminated in this country because of exercising their religious beliefs. Most certainly not for engaging in 15 to 30 seconds of silent prayer. If you have the right to be able to take a knee before the national anthem, I would think that we would have the right to be able to take a knee in silent prayer as well.
You know, it's interesting how at times like this, my atheist friends quote the Bible to me, and they say, well, it says in Matthew that you should go in the closet and pray. And so even your own, Lord and Savior says, you need to do that privately. And how do you answer when somebody sort of throws that back at you?
I say thanks for reading one of the greatest works of all time in the best-selling book of history. Let's sit down and have more discussions about that, because there's a lot more truth that I want to teach you out of that scriptures. But to the point in terms of legality, yeah, look, if Coach Kennedy were doing this for the praise of man, he's doing it for wrong and sinful reasons, perhaps. He's doing this, he engaged in this prayer as a commitment he privately made to God to exercise. And I think it belies the fact that he was taking this prayer in silence. He was not standing up, grabbing the microphone or the bullhorn and telling everybody in the stands to recite the Lord's Prayer. He was sitting there in silent prayer for 15 to 30 seconds. Meanwhile, you've got another coach on the team who is a practicing Buddhist, and he would say silent Buddhist chants after the game as well. He still was employed, but Coach Kennedy was terminated. And by the way, I think the Buddhist deserves the same protection that Coach Kennedy deserves, and I'm glad that he's preserved there. But the fact remains that you can't pick and choose which religions are going to receive the treatment of faith here, protected in other faith. Coach Kennedy deserves that protection, as does every religious employee in the country. And right now, it is very, I think, confusing at a minimum for coaches, especially when it comes to displays of religion on campus. Prayer in football seems to go hand in hand, for good or for ill. Is the coach supposed to kind of plug his ears and run away screaming, I can't hear you, when his players grab a knee after the game in a prayer circle? That would send a different message as well. But that's why we need the Supreme Court to answer these questions for coaches and teachers everywhere.
When Jesus talks about that in Matthew, he's really talking about intent when you pray. Are you sincere? Are you trying to show off? Apparently, Coach Kennedy seems to be a very sincere man. He wasn't doing it to be showy and to show off. He was doing it out of the sincerity of his heart. Because of that, Jesus would approve the prayer that he did. But you mentioned something about praying out loud, and that's interesting with the next topic, because that one has to do with the loudspeaker at the Cambridge Christian School, which happened very close to us here when they were playing for the Florida High School Athletic Association. And there were all kinds of threats about the prayer being said over the loudspeaker. Tell us what happened in that case.
Yeah, both schools. So two Christian schools playing in the state championship football game, Class 2A division at the Citrus Bowl, or that's how I'm always going to remember it. I guess it's now Camping World Stadium, but right. Back then it was the Citrus Bowl. So owned by the city of Orlando. The game is being hosted by the Florida High School Athletic Association, which is a state agency for high school athletics in the state of Florida. They're playing a university Christian school, so two Christian schools playing one another. They both have a tradition dating back for decades, since the school's founding, of opening their athletic contests, along with a lot of other things in their schools, with prayer. And at football, they do that with a prayer over the loudspeaker. Why over the loudspeaker? Why not just on the field? Well, that's because mom and dad are up in the stands and junior's on the field. And in order to pray together, there's only one way to be able to do that in the open air, and that's through amplification. And especially in a cavernous stadium like the Citrus Bowl or Camping World Stadium, you got to use the PA system, which, by the way, once carried the words of Billy Graham as he came there not once, not twice, but 3 times in a crusade. So same PA system where Billy Graham occupies. Well, they make this request as they're going out to the state championship game. Both schools do. So the FHSA could have come back and said, no, we don't have time. We got to move on. They didn't. They came back and said, not only do we not have time, that's a religious message that you'd want to convey. And we can't allow a religious message to occur on state-owned property. And that would be forbidden from our charter. It would be, I can't remember the exact words, out of bounds or something like that they used to say off limits. That was what they said. It would be off limits, legally speaking. And they cite a litany of cases that really didn't have application in this context, but that was the reason for doing so. So they didn't just simply say we don't have time. They said we don't have time because we don't agree with the viewpoint of the speech that would be communicated in that whole thing.
So Camping World Stadium is on what kind of property? You said state?
It's owned by the city of Orlando, which would be broadly the state, as in the kind of the broader context. Forgetting for the moment, by the way, that the Florida legislature opens up every meeting that it meets with in prayer, and so do many school boards and city councils and county commissions near you. It's the same basic issue, but because these private citizens wanted access to the state-owned microphone or the city-owned and state-controlled microphone, they said no, you can't do that for religious purposes. Now they had halftime speakers and music played by bands and cheerleaders over the microphone during halftime. There were advertisements all throughout the whole thing by Gatorade and Nike and Hooters and other places like that. Those messages were fine, but you couldn't have a 30-second prayer whatsoever. And so we've been litigating that case now since that was 2015. We filed a lawsuit in 2016. We've been up to the 11th Circuit. They sent us back down to do some more work on the case, and we're right towards the end of that whole process now, trying to stand for the very simple principle here that the lesson that the FHSAA taught to student athletes across the state of Florida is that prayer in public is wrong, that you should hide that light under your bushel and not engage in that activity outside of your prayer closet or inside your school. And we're pushing back against it, saying, no, the 11th Circuit has previously said in a different case, you cannot banish religion to the broom closets or whispers in the hallway. That's not permissible. And we're standing for the principle here that two Christian schools, whom nobody in the Western Hemisphere would have thought was speaking other than the two of them, no one would have thought that prayer was attributed to anybody but those two schools. Nobody would have thought that. Those two schools had the right to be able to do that if they so chose.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't surprising that they would ask for it. It was traditional with them. They were Christian schools. One of them has Christian in their name, right?
Yeah, Cambridge
Christian School, right? So, I mean, you would expect that maybe a prayer, if they had just allowed that for 1 minute, who would have gotten hurt in that process? Who would have been damaged? Whose soul would have been crushed, in the process? And part of this argument, and I know with the Bladensburg cross, there were people that said when they drove by that cross, it hurt them so much. And, they could cite damages that would occur. That seems to me to be coming from a different place than what they seem to be fighting for always. They're saying the Constitution, but it seems like they're really fighting for something else.
I remember standing on the steps of the Supreme Court of the United States during the arguments for that case, and there was rallies going on while the justices were hearing arguments inside. I was outside shivering in the cold, waiting for things to be over with, and listening to the other side make their arguments out there. And they had a roving band of people that were screaming into a microphone about how awful this case was. And one of them said, I view that monument, cross-shaped Veterans Memorial, honoring 49 men who fought and died for our freedom in World War I. He says, I view that monument as a gang symbol of Christianity. It is like giving the middle finger, he said, to atheists and secularists everywhere, standing there right in the middle of the road in Bladensburg, Maryland. And I couldn't help but think of the descendants that I had met that were relatives of the men on that memorial, African-American men and white men who had fought side by side in a time when there was deep segregation in that area. They're listed in alphabetical order on that memorial, all because their moms knew one thing: if they didn't preserve the names of their sons, they would be forgotten to history. And the left would be eager to sandblast their names off of that memorial or just simply remove it entirely because it dared appear on public property. Thankfully, the Supreme Court saw through that ruse and said, no. This is in perfect keeping with our tradition and our history in our country. This is how we have honored our war dead for years in our country. And these monuments, even if they have obvious displays of religion, as in this cross display there, or just incidental ones with like a Star of David up in the corner, those are perfectly acceptable and in keeping with the history and tradition of our country. And they put the stamp of approval on those monuments and monuments like them, saying they are now presumed to be constitutional both before and after the date of that argument. And this is a huge win for religious liberty in our country.
It is, and there's been a lot of attacks. Not saying it's going to stop, but there's been a lot of attacks. We were in Las Cruces, and they were trying to take a cross down. Pensacola has a big case that I believe is still going on. They're still fighting it. And then I remember one in California where it was a mission, and they actually got that removed. And it was a pretty hefty size cross, and it was taken down. And so,
yeah, Troy, we should think about this too. I mean, think if the decision goes the other direction. If the Bladensburg cross decision loses, and we were concerned that actually could, the mandate that would issue there would set loose a bulldozer from 1 First Street and go across the country, stopping first in Arlington, knocking over the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice right outside the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. That is a memorial to World War I soldiers in the shape of a cross there as well. It would keep on going to the Tomb of the Unknown that has that famous epitaph on there that says, "Here lies one but known but to God." It would keep on going across the country to monuments, memorials, and Ten Commandments displays, Stars of David on campuses like the Ohio Capitol Complex and all across the country, removing these. Think about that. In the country of the United States of America, we were this close to having religious symbols knocked down, bulldozed, crushed by sledgehammers, removed from public sphere, all because they dared to mention religion in the country that otherwise protects religious liberty and free speech. We were that close to making that the case here, and thank goodness that didn't occur. But that's what's occurring. In that case, there was physical symbols and monuments. In other cases, they're intangible. There's speech and exercise. That is still an effort to drive that out of the public square. Coach Kennedy and University Christian School are great examples of those, right? They're just speech. Well, why doesn't Coach Kennedy just go off in the corner and stand in a closet to be able to say his prayer after the game? Well, because he doesn't have to. The Constitution doesn't require you to hide your faith. You are not required to somehow disappear out of the sight of everyone to be able to exercise your faith. The Supreme Court said back in 1963 or 69 in Tinker v. Des Moines that neither students nor teachers lose their rights to the freedom of expression once they enter the schoolhouse gates. And that presumably includes the football field here as well. And so that promise that the founding fathers made to us long ago is in severe jeopardy because the attacks on religion are severe and openly hostile right now. And unless you and I stand up for these freedoms, we will be destined to lose them.
And those soldiers who the Bladensburg Cross was honoring were fighting against an enemy that were trying to do the exact thing that we here in America find ourselves fighting against. The enemies within, and to smash these symbols. And, even Coach Kennedy, went overseas, fought for freedom, and here he is fighting for his own life and his own freedom. There's so many other things to talk about. And this one also, just got one more in the last few minutes here. It has to do with nativity scenes. And I'd have to admit, the last Christmas season, it seemed pretty tame. I guess people weren't out walking around looking at these nativities and creating a big fuss, but it's always been a big fuss. And the one that you're directly working with is the one in Delaware, and they had banned the nativity from the public square. What are we seeing in these cases that always seem to be this attack on Christmas that always seems to happen right on schedule?
Yeah, look, it's always the debate about whether or not religion is welcome in public again. And this gets to the case that we mentioned, the American Legion case that we took to the Supreme Court. This is where this is starting to pay off. You've got up in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, you've got this case where the Knights of Columbus donated a nativity set, a creche, to the city there for display. There's a bandstand right off the beach. If you've ever been there, it's right there. And there's other displays. You got, Santa Claus and nutcrackers and other Christmassy kind of things that are displayed around there. One of the incidents of of Christmas time is a nativity scene. And so they offered that one for display there, and the city rejected that. And so we sued them, alleging this, that the American Legion kind of changed things here. And so we've now been in negotiation with them, and it looks like we're going to resolve that matter here pretty quickly, amicably, allowing that display to reappear. But other circuits, other courts in the country, and I'm thinking of Indiana for one, actually have issued decisions on this, where they've said, look, the American Legion case changed the game here. And now that we can welcome religious symbols in public, that also includes nativity scenes. And so it's perfectly acceptable to have a nativity scene on the lawn of a city park or city square. All these kind of traditional city circles in the middle of small town America, all over the country. You don't have to worry about having 9 reindeer and Santa Claus next to this guy called Joseph and Jesus and Mary there, and a couple of wise men. It's okay to even have just the one display. That's all part and parcel of who we are as a country. These have been displays going back since we were a country forever.
The Supreme Court precedents that were there did say that there needed to be an equal representation of Santa Claus and secular and the Star of David and all that. Is that the precedent that you're using?
That's what we're going to start figuring out now. So the courts are now looking at the American Legion case, saying that religious symbols on public property are perfectly presumed to be constitutional because they're part of our tradition and keeping. If they're within that tradition, then they should be welcome in the public square. The previous precedent had been, you got to have a couple nutcrackers, reindeer, and Santa Claus next to the nativity scene to make it kind of lawful. And that's still a safe way to go. And I think it's perfectly acceptable to have all those things together, put the Grinch in there as well for good measure, and you're fine. But if you want to have a display amidst all those other, a religious display amidst all the other secular displays, the Supreme Court has now said that that's probably okay. And other courts below are interpreting the Supreme Court's decision on religious monuments like war memorials to go further to say, well, look, not only are war memorials okay, but we think probably nativity scenes fall within that tradition in our country. How about religious displays within city seals? The county of Lehigh, for instance, in Pennsylvania, had an open Bible and a cross, I think, in their city seal, and some atheists sued to remove that from the seal. And the Third Circuit said, well, no, that's perfectly fine. Look at American Legion. That's, again, a display on public property of a religious symbol. It's presumed to be constitutional. It's within our keeping and tradition. It's perfectly fine. So we're going to start seeing multiple areas now open up to displays of religion in our country that heretofore, in our lifetimes, we've never seen.
I wonder how many people even knew that cross or that Bible was in the seal until somebody brought it up and went, aha. And now they've made a bigger case out of it because most people probably didn't see it, probably weren't offended by it. But that's another big thing.
Here's the challenge I'll give to you and your friends. If your county had to remove something from their seal, I'm thinking up in Ohio where Franciscan University is. They used to have a seal that included the Franciscan University chapel with a cross in it. They removed that under threat of a lawsuit, not even the lawsuit itself, but just a threat of it all. Well, look, I think under this new case, I think you can put that monument back up inside your seal. And so if your county or state has removed something religious from their seal that's this longstanding seal that they've had forever, just because it was religious, I think we can look at that case now and say, no, I think you can put that back in.
And that's where you guys come in, is the threat happens. They get this letter from some group like the Freedom from Religion Foundation or the American Atheists, and they get this threat and it looks all official, it has letterhead on it, and they get all scared. And so they immediately think, well, they're probably doing something wrong and they need to stop whatever practice that is, or pull down whatever this is, or erase whatever's on there. But that's not the case. What they need to do is to contact First Liberty, and then you begin the process. What do you find that once you go toe to toe with some of these groups out there, what happens?
We win is the short answer to that question. We win these cases more often than we don't. I don't want to put a specific percentage on it, but if it were my batting average, I would be making big bucks in the national or the Major League Baseball. We have a very high winning percentage because we take good cases for one thing, and we know how to win these cases for the rights of religious liberty to go forward on these things. And so, yeah, look, if you get a letter, if you're, for instance, you're a school board in Florida and you want to open your meetings with prayer, my guess is you're going to get a letter from one of these groups with a bunch of initials in their name. And they're going to tell you that this is wrong and you're a horrible human being and that there's all these people that are going to be offended by you. Look, call me before you respond to that. Let's have a conversation. If you're doing something wrong, I'm going to tell you you're doing something wrong. But more than likely, you're not doing anything wrong. When it comes to that issue of prayer before public meetings, we've been doing that since before we were a country. The guys who founded and wrote the First Amendment, they opened their meeting to write the First Amendment in prayer led by a chaplain in the United States Congress before it was actually an official Congress. I mean, it is preposterous to think that this is something other than our age-old tradition in this country that has been welcomed in every corner of our country. We can do it there as well. So, I mean, again, if you get one of these letters, whether it's that issue or another, stop, give us a call, have your school board attorney, your county counsel, give us a call. Let's sift through this issue and figure out how we can preserve religious liberty for you and others.
And how do they get in touch with First Liberty?
Yes, thanks for asking. I should have pointed that out. Go to firstliberty.org, FIRST liberty.org. It's the best place to go, not only for information about these cases, but there's a button on there that can let you request legal help. And that comes directly to our offices. Our attorneys directly review that. And usually we respond at least by phone within the day. And in other cases like you, I might even show up at your front doorstep and have a conversation with you and get to have a longer friendship than one that lasts just in a legal dispute.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, you guys have been doing a lot of great work. They go on your website. It's also interesting. You have all the stories on there of all the cases that you have been fighting or you've won or you're currently engaged in. And it's actually, I would say it's discouraging in one sense, but it's also very encouraging to see that there are people like you out there that are fighting the good fight. Now, if I bring my case, my immediate thought is, oh man, Jeremy's going to cost me an arm and a leg to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Is that going to happen?
Not at all. We represent our clients for free. And thankfully, we've got good people like you and others around the country who have invested in this firm because they know one thing, that you shouldn't have to pay an attorney to get your civil rights back. And so we've been sitting very well blessed in this country right now with a lot of donors around the country committed to preserving religious liberty in this and many other issues. So thankfully, we do all of our cases pro bono. And by the way, we usually bring in outside counsel to assist us with these things, not all the time, but sometimes we'll put together a rather sizable legal team that Fortune 500 companies would be envious of. And they do all their time on these cases for free as well. It typically costs you roughly about $1 million to take a case from complaint to the Supreme Court of the United States and back. And sometimes that's a low estimate. And yet we do all of that for free because people like you and others stand up beside us and say, no, we want to make sure that that guy is able to take a knee in prayer after the football game.
Yeah. Well, you guys are doing a great job. I mean, it's a good thing that you only charge minimum wage yourself to make this happen. But I know everyone there is not only are they compensated, but I think there's a certain sense of fulfillment that you all have, that you're doing the right thing.
I tell new attorneys that work here, you've got to be called to do this job. It is a very difficult job and one that the world will not like you for. And there are other forces at play that make it even more difficult at times, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. Yeah. And so unless you're called to this job, don't go to it. You can make a lot more money doing more fun things like, I don't know, right? I'm just going to pull something out of the hat randomly, like writing for the Mickey Mouse Club or something like that. You can make a lot more money doing fun things like that than you can doing this stuff. But
right.
Yeah.
Well, yes. So I would say, people out there, donate first to your church. That's biblical. And then you have above and beyond looked at places like what First Liberty is doing. You're certainly doing God's work, and we do appreciate it. So thank you, Jeremy, for spending some time with us here and holding the line. And we'll keep up on all the fights that you're engaging in out there and be praying for you also.
Glad to do it. And thanks, Troy, for what you and you guys are doing down there. This is important work. We can't do it by ourselves. We preserve freedom one conversation at a time, whether it's this conversation or another one, or most especially my very favorite conversation to preserve freedom, with your kids over dinner. Tell them what freedom actually means. Teach the next generation what it means to be free. Because like Ronald Reagan said, if we don't do that, we'll wake up one day in America and remember what used to be, a land that used to be free. Let's not have that country arise. Let's talk to our kids about freedom.
That's great. All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.